All right, now you men pay close attention here. Remember our little discussion at the beginning of the last session. Who can tell me, men, anybody, any volunteers that want to tell me what their wife's favorite flower is? Huh? Pillsbury, that's it right there. Huh? White lily? Well, as I was thinking about conflict resolution, I couldn't help but think about the story that the preacher told about his preaching about marriage and working on resolving conflict. And he wanted everyone to, after the service was over, come back to the foyer area and to take home with them a wooden cross that he had prepared to give every married couple. And he told them, I would like for you to take this cross and put it in the room of your house where you argue the most, so that when you see the cross, you'll remember the sacrifice that Jesus made for you and the love that he has for you, and to sacrifice yourself. And so after the service was over, one woman came up to the preacher and said, I heard you say I need a cross for the room where we argued the most. And he said, yes, ma'am. She says, I need 5 because we argue all over the house. Well, I hope that's not the case for us, that we, in resolving conflict, will take an opportunity to never argue in the bedroom, because again, that needs to be a sanctuary, a wonderful place for us to enjoy the sexual relationship, the emotional intimacy, spiritual intimacy, but that as we seek to resolve conflict, that we don't jump one another, that we make a date, we ask each other if we can talk about this, is this a good time, and set a date for that, and then approach each other with kindness and love. And as we do that and we seek to resolve the conflict and go through the steps and the processes that are found in the Bible, we want to remember also, as we conclude then this seminar today, is that there are a lot of things that we can do to make sure that we are enjoying the ride down the highway. We think about, as we started off here, mentioning the fact that marriages, ceremonies usually begin in a car. And I hope that the next time you get in your car, you'll think about some of the things that we talked about knowing your passenger, about being careful, about road rage, about making sure that you know the rules, because we truly want you to be happy. And that a marriage like this, as we started out talking about yesterday, doesn't have to be elusive, but rather when we think about a marriage like that, we certainly don't want that. We don't want us to be ugly and to express ill will toward one another. So how do we make sure, again, as we end up this seminar for today and talking about some principles, how do we deal with those struggles and realize that it's not elusive, that marital happiness isn't elusive? Well, we need to learn as much as we can, and some of the things that we can learn along the way is to follow some good examples of people. Follow the example of others. Now, Philippians 4:17 says that we are to mark those who are examples of those that we can follow and emulate their example. It's the same word found in Romans 16, verses 16 and 17, when Paul spoke about marking those who are causing division. In other words, call attention to that and avoid that kind of division that was going on in the religious world. Similarly, but on the positive side of things, we need to hold up before our friends, our families, examples to follow. And that's why I'm so glad that those of you who have been happily married have come to this seminar, because we want you to share these principles with others and to share with younger couples or your family members what it takes to have a good, solid, long-lasting, happy marriage. But we also realize that as we follow examples that are good, we need to be able to know, well, where can we go to find some good examples? Well, some of them are in some of the books that we have been recommending along the way. And one example that needs to be followed is this marvelous book called The Love Deer. I want you to know about this book. If you've watched the movie Fireproof, then you'll be familiar with this book. You can get it at usually, I think, Walmart's for a long time, or the Walmart was carrying it. Certainly any Christian bookstore, Christian book distributors has it. And I keep several of them in my library that we share with couples, especially when maybe someone says, I'm ready to give up. What do I do? I'd like to, save my marriage if I could, but I'm so tired of it. And I say, well, I want you to go through this book. It's a 40-day journey. And I have a sort of a streamlined version of it where I've made a few little changes on it on my computer, and I'll print that out and give it to them. And it's real easy. If you haven't, let me see the hands of those of you who know or have read this book. Okay, a few of you. It's a great book that has in it just basically one page with a Bible verse on it, and then a devotional thought associated with what love is all about. And then there is an activity that's required or asked of you to perform and to share with your wife in some way. And it's a really wonderful book to work through because it teaches us about the nature of true biblical love, but it puts us in the mode of being proactive to try to do something to really win the heart of our mate and to soften their heart, but also to teach us how God would want us to live. Really, really recommend that book. It's a good resource of an example to follow. Another one that you may be familiar with are The 5 Love Languages by Gary Chapman. He's written several books associated with that topic of the 5 love languages. But I have at the back of your packet a little quiz. I'm not going to ask you to take it here, but I would like for you to take it at home. It won't take you very long, but essentially the idea is this, and if we'll look at the next slide, I think I put up there the 5 love languages. There's another book that... See, did I put up the 5 love languages on the next slide? No, I didn't. I'm sorry. So go back. I think I have it down a little bit later. But so the 5 love languages is the idea that each of us speak a different type of love language. There are those who speak acts of service. That's their love language. There are those who need affection more than they need acts of service as a way of showing love. Gift buying, quality time, and so forth. And I really want to share with you, especially those of you who are older, to not think, well, I've got it all down. I know my wife really well. Because I've had men come up to me after we had a whole session on the love languages and say to me, wow, I wish I had read that 30 or 40 years ago. He says, things would have probably been a lot easier along the way if I had recognized that the way that I express love is different than the way my wife expresses love. And that we all have an air tank that we sort of operate out of love that needs to be filled up. And if it's not being filled up, then we begin to suffocate and we begin to die. And so he says, we've got to know what we need to put in that air tank of our spouse. Love is what they need, but what kind of love is it? Is it acts of service? Is it quality time? Is it physical touch? Is it appreciation in terms of communication and so forth? Words of affirmation. So an excellent book that has helped a lot of couples. Love and Respect is another one that is recommended, and this was one that I recommended to the men today. Great book based on the Song of Solomon. So again, examples to follow, people that have written about these things that will really help us to be better at being married. Then another series of books here that one of them I've mentioned called Point Man by Steve Farrar. A really good book for men to read. So you're getting married, even though that is a book that was primarily written from the perspective of helping couples who are engaged. Now, in fact, today it's called So You're Engaged. They changed the title. I need to change the slide. Just noticed that they changed the title not too long ago, So You're Engaged. But the things that he teaches in there are things that we teach couples in post-marital situations. And what he says is the first thing is that couples need to be committed to each other and understand the importance of commitment. Commitment to what? commitment to love in the Bible way, commitment to communicate, commitment to resolve conflict, commitment to serve God, commitment to really rearing children in the admonition of God. So there's about 12 or 13 topics about being committed and understanding that when we say that I do, and I promise to love you till by death we are parted, we need to follow through on that commitment. And then another one, sacred marriage, which really helps us to see this as what Paul describes in Ephesians 5 of the interrelationship between husband and wife in Christ and the church. And the more that we understand that relationship of Christ and the church, we could better understand the relationship of a husband and wife. But I will say this, he kind of gives a twist to it that is something that I have come to appreciate, and that is the more that Carla and I grow in our relationship from a biblical perspective, the more I've come to love the church. The more I've come to better understand the love that Christ has for the church. It heightens my awareness and appreciation of this wonderful body of Christians. So sacred marriage, allowing us to see deep into the heart of God. And when we do that, as I spoke about last night, not just seeing the diamond from afar, but looking at the intricate elements of that diamond, knowing God will help us to help our relationship all the more. Know God. Know Him. All right. So this last book then, and there are many out there, but it's one that I'm going to draw from for just a few moments because Magnificent Marriage is based on some 6,000 couples. You'll see that at this next point here. Of what they did was they examined the lives of some 6,000 couples from across the nation. Couples that were recommended to them being highly productive, functioning couples that seem to be very happy. And so those highly productive, happy, functioning couples participated in this survey and in this research program because what these authors and these researchers want to know, what were the common threads that existed between all these couples? What was the common denominator, as it were, for all of these happy couples? And what they found were 6 foundational themes that ran throughout these couples. Those are the ones I want to share with you in the moments we have remaining and focus on one in particular here in just a moment. And then as a part of your homework assignment, what I'd like for you to do as a couple is decide which one of these 6 themes best describes our relationship and which one needs the most work. Because if we want to reach the, again, this apex of spiritual happiness and marital joy, here are some things we need to make sure that are in place. So what are they? Well, number one, and these again are, if you're looking at the handout I gave you, can be found on one of the pages in there. Let's see if I can find it. Enjoying the ride, focused on the road ahead. I've left a blank for you to fill that in as we go along. But notice that the first one is commitment. Commitment. This is what needs to be in place for a couple to be very successful. They need to be committed. Successful couples are dedicated to promoting each other's welfare and happiness. They make their marriage a top priority with respect to how they invest their time and energy. So notice the commitment is on the marriage relationship itself, not upon careers, not upon being popular in the community, not upon material things, but upon that relationship. Letting that be first and foremost. We are indeed to seek first the kingdom of God, Matthew 6, verse 33. We are to love our wives as Christ loved the church, submitting ourselves one to another, Ephesians 5, 21 through 22. And then in verse 25, as Paul speaks about this marvelous relationship, understand, comparing it to Christ and the church, that it ought to be elevated to this marvelous status of tremendous importance. So commitment. Then number 2, notice appreciation. Successful couples show appreciation for one another. And this is what you were talking about the other night when we were mentioning some of these things. Happy couples express a great deal of appreciation to each other. They build each other up psychologically. They give sincere compliments and enhance each other's self-esteem. What did we say Abraham Maslow said about our needs? Food, water, shelter, self-esteem. We all need it. We all need to feel as though we are valuable, that we are of worth. Now, we need to find that worth and value in the message of the gospel. When Paul said in Ephesians 4 that we are to walk worthy of the vocation wherewith we are called, he was not using it as an adjective in that sense of describing our walk. I'm sorry, he wasn't using it as a noun to say you are worthy in that sense, but rather as an adjective to describe that we understand the worth and the value of what we have. Because none of us are worthy in the sense that we can say to God, I'm so great and so wonderful, you owe me salvation. But rather we understand just how much Christ paid for us and that He loved us even while we were yet sinners. So I understand that worth and that value, and that helps me to, in my own sort of self-esteem, recognize my importance. But do we not know that our self-esteem can be easily torn down by our spouse? Right? Things that they say, they know us better than we, oftentimes many people do. They see us at our worst, and it's really easy for them to see us that way and to tear us down. Watch out what you say. How do you treat your spouse? Encourage them. Show them appreciation. Now, this reminds me of something that is an important sort of behavioral aspect that needs to be evident in our lives. Behavior modification. Some of you educators, psychologists know about this theory or this idea of human behavior, and how is it that we can modify people's behavior. We can do it sometimes without them even knowing that we're doing it, by positive reinforcement, by when they're doing something good, we make sure that we compliment them. And there's a lot more to that I wish we had time to talk about. Even Peter, I think, makes reference to this in 1 Peter chapter 3 when he's saying, if we can't win, if a woman couldn't win her husband by the word, then she is to do it by her manner of life. Modify his behavior by the way she lives. So if we want our wives, men, to show appreciation to us, we've got to show appreciation to them. We've got to model the kind of behavior we want to have expressed to us. We've got to do that. Appreciation. Then, number 3, positive communication. Here's where we want to spend just a few moments looking at a number of slides and thinking about some important truths, because communication is to a relationship what blood is to life. Absolutely critical. If a marriage is going to be strong, we've got to learn to communicate effectively. Now, think about what that means. Not only is it to love what blood is to life, it's impossible to have any kind of relationship unless there is communication. That's true with our relationship with God or with others. Now, notice this next paragraph. It's been defined as the process of sharing yourself both verbally and non-verbally, in such a way that the other person can both accept and understand what we are sharing. A lot of couples have trouble with the area of communication because they don't realize they're communicating other than just with their words. Now notice, it's a process. We have a sender, we have an idea, something we want our spouse to know about. How do I communicate feelings, thoughts, desires? Is it hard to find the right word? Yes. How do I say it? So I put it into words, and then as I'm saying those words are subject to being misunderstood because of either the tone I use or I've chosen the wrong word. I'm transmitting that then either through spoken or written communication. And all along the way there's this noise. Sometimes it's literal noise, but sometimes it's internal noise that's going on inside of us. We're not paying attention because of something that happened at work or some issue that was unresolved in the past. Or maybe we're thinking one thing and they didn't really mean it that way. And we're not listening carefully. Communication is fraught with all kinds of issues. But what we have to understand is that it therefore takes work. And a part of that work of communication involves our taking a look at ourselves to see how we're communicating. Communication has two very important elements to it. Verbal and nonverbal. Verbal and nonverbal. Listen to this sentence several times. I didn't say she stole the purse. 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 Now, that sentence was the same sentence in terms of its content every time. But it had a different meaning every time, didn't it? What made the difference? Emphasis. Emphasis. Do you know that studies have shown that when we are trying to figure out the meaning of a message that we're sending to our spouse, that we attribute a whole lot more of the meaning to the tone than we do to the content? What did they mean by that? How did they say it? That's what people are paying attention to. And when our nonverbals don't match up with our verbals, we send this sort of strange message that's hard to figure out, and we sometimes put people in a double bind. Like this little child from a research study that I had read about being institutionalized, having lots of problems. And when his mother would come to see him, they noticed, counselors and therapists noticed that he was visibly agitated throughout the rest of the day and on into the next day, and they couldn't figure out, what's going on here? And as they began to observe a little more closely what was happening and watching the interaction between the mom and the little boy, they noticed that she would constantly put her son into this double bind. He would see her and be excited when she would come to visit him, and he'd run up and grab her, and then she would feel her coldness and like, don't touch me. And so he'd kind of pull away, and then she'd say, well, what's the matter, Johnny? Don't you love me? I mean, that's frustrating, isn't it, right? Have you ever felt that way in a relationship when you're trying to figure this out, and your husband or your wife is saying one thing, but you know there's sort of a hidden message, right? By the tone, by the sarcasm, and you're trying to figure out what does that really mean. Okay, well, I won't go. No, I said go. Well, we've seen our children. We've been in situations like that at work. Sometimes people are very harsh in their communication patterns, and it drives the other person away. Now, this next slide is a reminder of the fact that we all do have various love languages that we speak. So it goes beyond just the content of what is said, but even in the way that we live our lives. And so here they are. What are the love languages that are often spoken by different people? Some of them are words of affirmation. Some of them have to do with quality time, giving and receiving gifts, physical displays of affection, acts of service. You need to figure out what your spouse's love language is and what your love language is. Because the problem is we're trying to communicate and say to our spouse that we love them, and if our type of love language is through words of affirmation, and we're saying, honey, I love you so much, you're so wonderful, you're so great, I love you, and we're thinking, well, they're not really responding, they don't seem content and happy. It's maybe because to them, words, may or may not carry a little bit of weight, but what they really like is quality time. That's what really communicates love to them. And men sometimes get frustrated. They come home and they may brought their wife a wonderful gift. They've been gone all week and they stopped and were very thoughtful to pick up something at the airport and bring to their wife when they came home and saw her and gave her the gift. And she said, well, that's nice. And he goes back to his office and she's not real happy, doesn't figure out, well, I thought of you, and you should just be all excited that I thought of you and I bought this gift for you. When he was growing up, receiving gifts from parents was like the way that they were saying, we love you, we care about you, you need this, we're going to give you that. But her love language is quality time, and you're not spending that time with her, and spending time really getting to be with her. And you don't understand, why isn't she accepting my love? Because that's not her love language. So, positive communication, learning what that communication looks like, involves other things besides just these acts of service or understanding the love languages. Notice this as well. Is it coming up, Gary? Here we go. The vital aspect of this is the tone of voice and our mannerisms, our nonverbals. Making sure that that tone matches up with the content. If we say we love our spouse, say it with tender affection. If we think about words that we're trying to communicate in ideas, look at what the Bible says about some of these things that we ought to possess. It ought to be with grace, seasoned with salt. Our speech needs to really have a purity element involved into it that is preserving, that is helpful, that is kind, that is good. Now, what specifically does that look like? Well, notice first of all that it's not only seasoned with salt, but, by the way, I forgot about this, sorry. These are some phrases as far as Carla said to me that I can say to her anytime. 3-word sentences that I can say to her anytime. These are great communication phrases. You ready, guys? Here we go. The first one is I can say to her anytime, I love you. The second one, you're right. I can say that to her anytime. Number 3, I was wrong. I can say that to her anytime. 4, let's go out. 5, let me help. 6, you look beautiful. And 7, here's my wallet. Okay? So I thought, well, isn't that interesting? There are some little phrases we can use that really do help a lot. But thinking biblically about then things that are seasoned with salt, speech that is with grace, notice it is guarded and it's not impulsive. Someone find Proverbs 12:16 for me real quick and read that, and someone else find 10:19. Who will read Proverbs 12:16? Someone raise your hand. Who will read that for us? Look at what God says about communication. You volunteer? Go ahead.
12:16.
Yes.
The vexation of a fool is known at once, but the prudent ignores an insult.
Okay, so here's a foolish man, a violent man, someone who allows his wrath to be known at once. Don't be impulsive. Don't be so quick to just say the first thing that comes to your mind. Think about things. Think carefully about that. Guard your tongue. All right, who's got Proverbs 10:19?
When there are many words, transgression is unavoidable.
Okay. Sometimes some of us just talk too much. And I realize some people process out loud, but sometimes we say things in the process of that are very hurtful. In the frustration of a moment to really express our hurt about a situation. Well, that's it, I'm done, I want a divorce. You may not really mean that. And I've known of couples who have told me they said that, and it just cut like a knife to their spouse. And immediately when it came out of their mouth, this one woman told, as she was writing this article, and I read it a number of years ago, she said, I knew as soon as it came out of there, I didn't mean it, but the look on my husband's face. And so for years, he was always wondering, what was I thinking? What was in the back of my mind about all this? Is that where she really was in terms of her commitment? I know we're human beings and we need to learn to forgive and understand that sometimes our tongue gets away from us. But watch out about just saying whatever you feel like saying. Because words are like wounds. Words can pierce our hearts and really hurt. Notice they're also thoughtful and not accusatory. Now, someone read Proverbs 25, verse 11 for us. Very important passage here that I want us to really visualize. Proverbs 25, verse 11. Who has that?
Like apples of gold is a setting of silver, is a word spoken in right circumstances.
Okay. Now, let's just say you walked into the church building one day and there was these apples of gold sitting in this beautiful silver bowl here. You think if you walked in and you saw that, it would draw your attention? You think you would notice maybe those apples and contrasted with that silver? I don't know much about culinary presentation, but supposedly those who are professionals can tell you how to present food on a plate and put garnish on there and, to make it really much more appealing. What about photographs? What do we do for photographs to enhance them? We frame it, right? We put a frame around it, some sort of border, and it'll bring out certain colors. If we'll think about things that we're struggling with and frame them in the right way and say them in the right way, we can communicate our concerns a lot more effectively than if we just sort of, just say whatever we're thinking at the moment instead of trying to be careful about and guarding our tongue. I'll give you an example of this. We just got through talking about the sexual relationship. Well, what if, men are just not very sensitive to their wife and they're just sort of rushed in the way that they approach the sexual relationship. They become like, remember men, they end up being a Conan instead of a Solomon, right? All right, and you ladies would like for your wife to be a Solomon and not a Conan. Well, you could say to him, you just don't spend any time hugging me and kissing me and talking to me, and you just rush right into having a sexual relationship. Now, in her talking that way, what is she describing? What is she feeling at the moment? Some real hurt, right? She has some real needs. Now, how effective is that going to be in terms of its reception over here by the man? That type of speech, even though we get it, and he is totally wrong in the way he's approaching this. And there needs to be correction. But that type of speech is usually much more accusatory. It's already put him on the defensive. Instead of saying, you don't spend time, she really needs to say, I sometimes have these insecurities, or I just want to be loved so desperately for who I am and not my body, and I just can't get enough of your wonderful words and your touches. I love that. See, that's a lot different, isn't it? Now, I don't mean to just pick on the ladies there in terms of the communication, because obviously maybe a man is not approaching the right situation, but think about whatever it is and whatever it is that we're, whatever topic it is that we're addressing. If we'll start thinking about how can I reframe this so that it is received in a whole lot different manner. Not accusatory, but rather taking ownership for our feelings and finding a way that allows people to understand what you need, what you think, what you feel. there's going to be a whole lot more receptivity on that end when we are thoughtful and not accusatory. Speech communication needs also to be specific and not generalized. And again, that's the very point we're talking about there. Don't just say, well, you know, you never help around the house, or you never cook my favorite meal. You never, you know, a man may say to his wife, well, you never thank me for helping out around the house. Well, we got to be careful about overgeneralizing, right? And sometimes we men, when we hear our wife maybe say, you never helped around the house, or you never took out the trash, all we got to remember is what we did in 1972 when we took out the trash. And so therefore, your whole argument is fallacious because you don't remember that. You said never. We need to be specific when we say you never help around the house. Well, what do we mean? Do we mean, do we need some help with the trash? Do we need some help with the kids? Be specific about some things as you address them in resolving conflict. Learning some of these communication patterns and tactics or techniques helps us to get to where we want to be. But couples that lack these things or don't spend time on working on communication are not going to be successful and not going to be truly enjoying the relationship. Then it is edifying, it is not bitter. Well, look at the list. Some of you already looked at that list that we have in your outline, and here they are. Here are some things that are bitter. Have you said these things lately? Look at this list. I told you so. I can talk to you until I'm blue in the face and it doesn't do any good. You're just like your mother, unless you mean that in a good positive way, right? I can do whatever I like. You're always in a bad mood. Those things aren't helpful. Again, is she really always in a bad mood? Or is he always in a bad mood? You say, well, not always. But again, I'm saying if that is even how you feel, that's not helpful. If you don't like it, you can just leave. What about this next one? It's your fault. You can't do anything. Can't you do anything right? What's wrong with you? That was stupid. All you ever do is complain. All you ever do is think of yourself. Here's some more that aren't helpful. I can't do anything to please you. If you really love me, you do this. You get whatever you deserve. You're such a baby. Why don't you ever listen to me? Turnabout's fair play. Can't you be more responsible? You deserve a taste of your own medicine. What were you thinking? What's your problem? You're impossible. I can never understand you. I don't know why I put up with you. Do you always have to be right? I mean, these are things that we really need to stop and examine. Are they helpful? Are they encouraging? Are they edifying? Now let's go to the next one here quickly. It is soft and not harsh. Someone look at Proverbs 15, verse 1 quickly for us. And then we're going to take a look also at verse 4. Let's start with verse 4 actually in Proverbs 15. Someone read verse 4, Proverbs 15:4. Who has that?
A gentle tongue is a tree of life, but perverseness in it breaks the spirit.
All right. A gentle tongue is like a tree of life. Now, I don't know what exactly that tree of life is. Is he talking about in Genesis 1 or just a tree of life? The imagery is always good, it's beautiful, whatever it is. And a wholesome tongue is like that. But perverseness breaks people's spirit. And what that verse tells us that is that the tongue is exceedingly powerful to affecting change in your relationship, to building up one another. But now go back up to the first verse and listen to what he says is going to be an important communication strategy for communicating. What does he say? Who has that one?
Soft answer turns away wrath, ruthless words
Yeah. I have seen situations where a conflict or a disagreement just escalated out of control because we didn't have a soft answer. We just sort of raising our voice and the tension, you could just feel it, and you could see it on their face in anger, and I'm tired of this. I don't know why you're doing it. I've been in sessions like that, and I'm hearing this, and boy, you just wanted to get away from there. It was harsh. And maybe it wasn't just their tone was harsh, but their nonverbals were harsh. I had a guy sit in my office who said, John, they just had a restraining order placed on him. There was a discipline issue at the home. He saw it as just disciplining his child. They already had very dysfunctional, and he was just so frustrated. He sat in my office, and if I live to be 1 billion, I'll never forget what happened. This is word for word what happened. He said, John, I don't know why they're so afraid of me. I would not hurt a fly. And I was backing up then. That's what he said. I would not hurt a fly. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. That's what I wanted to say. What does that communicate? What is it communicating? What do our rolled eyes, and our body language, and all of that communicate to our spouse? And in the middle of our conversation, I know we can overanalyze, and sometimes this is just a comfortable position. I know that. But sometimes it's a position that says, I'm not letting you in, and you are wrong, and I am really angry at you, and I am protecting myself. I'm on the defensive. Think about what your body language communicates. Think about what your tone communicates. Think about the environment you're creating. And be careful about your speech. It needs to be soft, not just by the content, but also by our mannerisms. A number of years ago, had to do my student teaching to be certified as a teacher, and I was in a classroom in the evening or in the late afternoon with a bunch of freshmen, boys and girls, in a speech communication class. And I would come over at lunchtime to this class right before that was another section the same age, and my cooperating teacher was there, and she was always teaching, and they're always loud, and well, one time I came over, and it was really quiet, and I thought, are they even here? And I walked into the room, and there they were. They were sitting at their desk with rapt attention, listening to Mrs. Miller at the front of the room. And Mrs. Miller was up at the front of the room, and she was whispering. She had been at a debate tournament the weekend before, had lost her voice, working with kids. She had allergies and all that. So she was whispering and teaching class like this. The kids were just right there listening. And one little boy in the back, freshman boy, raised his hand. And he said, now, Mrs. Miller, do we have to do questions 2 and 3? She said, you can talk loud if you want to. He had even reduced his tone just because it was so quiet, and she had done that. You ever seen that in meetings? Some wise elder, his tone, careful, says, let's pray about this. Doesn't allow himself to get worked up and return evil for evil, getting louder. Soft answer turns away wrath, but grievous words stir up anger. Effective communication is soft, it's not harsh. Not only then are positive communication patterns that which is absolutely critical to successful families, but time together. Time together. They spend quality time together and in generous quantities. We're going to know our whys. We're going to truly dwell together in unity. We're going to have this phileo love that we'll talk more about tomorrow morning, that is cultivated, that is developed. It requires us to be together. Planned activities that engage our children, that engage one another in a coordinated effort to maybe plant a garden, to go on a fishing trip together, camping trip where we are really spending time talking and creating memories. Now, men, I just want to tell you something here, especially those of you who are younger. If you like to go fishing or there's something you really want to do, maybe go to a football game or something, and your wife's not crazy about it or she has never done that, make sure that you do it in, short time components and in the best of conditions. Let's say you want to go fishing. The first time you take your wife fishing, men, don't take her to a 3-day-long fishing trip in the middle of the summer where there are mosquitoes and sand and nasty everything, and the fishing may or may not be good, right? Make sure that the quality time is good and that it's very enjoyable, where they're going to for sure catch fish and where the time is limited and they got a comfortable chair and a nice fan and they feel good, right? Okay? Make it a great experience. You take your family on a vacation. You can't wait to get away. Don't be yelling at them every second about what they're doing and not doing. Well, look at there. You got mud on your knee again. What are you? Kids are that's going to happen. Make sure that the experiences that you're creating are not all around your rigid schedule and the way you think everything ought to be done, but be pliable. Create an atmosphere of some wonderful memories together, and one of the great places that can happen. It doesn't have to be at a fishing hole, it doesn't have to be at a football game, it doesn't have to be on a vacation. It can be right there at your dinner table. I have found too many marriages, too many families that don't have regular meals together with the television off. They eat at all other places at the house, or they're all occupied by their devices, and they're not sitting around a table sharing memories, making it positive, laughing about life, thinking about a Bible verse, talking about what that might mean, the encouragement it provides. And I look back on my family time and our family time together with some wonderful memories of meals, not only because of that good comfort food that Carla makes and the family enjoys being together, but we're sharing memories, we're talking about things, and it builds a bond between us. Time together that's most importantly going to be manifested in spiritual activities of families that are doing things in the church. That's what builds healthy, strong families, healthy, strong marriages. All right, spiritual well-being then is one that we've got to remember, that we've already took notice of several times. They have a strong spiritual faith which gives them strength and purpose. And in this last one, notice this. Oh, it didn't. Well, it should be on the last one. The ability to deal with crisis. Did I have it up there? Yeah, the ability to cope with stress and crises. Number 6, the ability to cope with stress and crises. Some families and marriages don't know how to cope. They don't have effective coping strategies. And when anything bad comes their way, loss of a job, someone in the family becomes ill, it ends up creating a lot of tension for the family and on the marriage. They don't know how to cope. I believe it's important for everyone to know these 3 things from Philippians chapter 4 for effective coping strategies. Philippians 4, verses 4 through 9. Paul says, "Rejoice in the Lord always, and again I say rejoice." How can a family rejoice when there is illness, when there is death, when there's financial crisis? How can that happen? How can we rejoice in all of these things? Because we have to remember to think right, verse 8. And that thinking right involves and necessitates our knowing something. That just because I don't feel good doesn't mean that I can't be happy. There's a difference between rejoicing and happiness. Rejoicing is a state of mind. It is an understanding of what is important in life and what life is all about and where we're going, that allows us to look through the hardships and the difficulties to see not why is this happening to me, but rather how am I going to use it for God? How am I going to allow it to strengthen me and teach me about dependency upon God? So I have to think right. I have to understand that this could be something that's refining my faith. That's why I can count it all joy when I fall into various temptations and trials. A crisis is an opportunity to grow. it's an opportunity to learn. A lot of us aren't thinking right about life, about one another. I have to learn to cope. And maybe we're not always getting what we need from what we believe our spouse should be giving to us. I need to see my wife, you need to see your husband as someone made in the image of God who is not perfect. So that when a problem comes along, I'm not so hypercritical and so judgmental about them. That I see that they have trials, they have tribulations, they have temptations. They're not perfect. I got to think right. I have to pray right. Verses 5 through 7, when Paul speaks about the fact that through supplication and prayer we make our requests known to God. And then verse 9, I have to learn to do right, to live right. The things that you have heard and seen in me do, and the God of peace shall be with you. So those are all important elements of, and again, much more could be said about each one of these. But as a part of your marriage assignment then for tonight, and all of those are listed on the last page of this handout, of the 5 assignments that I've given you for this weekend, or the 6 rather, are all on this last page. And number 5 tonight is which of these 6 foundational themes is most apparent in a relationship and which one needs to be improved. Now, I gave the men an extra one in there, and that's why this is only 5 for you ladies, but the men have an extra one in there, and so that's why on the back page there are 6. So I'd like for you to really work on those and think about those and what needs to happen in your own marriage.